Hello there, and welcome to Legends of News with me, Dermot. And now I can't wait to get started on this one because it's a good old mate of mine and colleague over many years who's joining me today. Listen, if you don't know her, you will soon know and love her, but I'm sure you all will recognise who she is. Been a constant on our screens and airwaves and radio and so many other media for so many years. Please excuse me for saying that. She is, of course, Julia Somerville. Yes, Julia's in the building. Hi there, Julia. Lovely to have you.
Hello. And I would like to add that not only were we mates, but we were actually, in a way, married. You are one of my very many screen husbands.
Okay, you've had a few.
I've had a few, and you are top of the list, darling.
Oh, right.
Oh,
bet
yes.
you say that to all the husbands.
No, I don't.
How are you? I mean, you're still working hard. I say, constant on our screens.
I know.
Still loving it.
Absolutely love it. I do this programme called Rip Off Britain for BBC, as I expect you know, and I'm incredibly lucky to be doing it. Yeah. I've been doing it now for 15 years. And to be back at the BBC, having started at the BBC, then gone to ITN, then come back to the BBC, has felt wonderful. I love doing
bouncing around there. Well,
Indeed.
let's do this in a kind of structured way and start at the beginning. Bit of the background. Now, you, as I remember, are from Wells, lovely Wells, Cathedral City in Somerset, where your dad was he was on land there, but he was an admiral, wasn't he?
No, that was my grandfather.
Grandfather, okay.
Yeah, and it was a little village called Dinder near
Just
Wells.
outside,
Yes,
right.
Just outside.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what was the schooling like and the exposure to, why did you want to become a journalist?
Well, my father worked for GCHQ. And, of course, we didn't know anything about GCHQ.
A spook?
No, he worked for The Office.
Of course.
That's what it was called, The Office. And when I was about 5, we moved from Beaconsfield down to Cheltenham because that's when GCHQ moved down to Cheltenham. Oh. And as I say, Dad's job was a mystery. I once had to write an essay, about my dad, and all my friends had dads who were doctors or vets or, worked in banks or did things. And I said to Dad, Dad, I've got to write an essay about you. And he said, oh, I'm very, very dull. Really? I said, yes, I need to know, what do you do? And he said, well, I work in the office. And I said, yeah, but Dad, what do you do? And he said, well, all right, I work for the Queen. So I thought, oh, wow, that's amazing. So I was imagining sort of velvet cushions and bits of parchment and stuff like that. And he said, it's extremely dull. I go in the morning, and on my desk, there's a pile of papers on one side of my desk. And then by the time I go home, they're on the other side of the desk. And I thought, that is so boring. So all I could write was, my dad has black hair and a very red nose. I could come up with. But looking back on it, of course, I now realise that he travelled a lot. He would go to Turkey, he'd go to Berlin, he'd go to Ascension Island. He was in Norway and all sorts of places. And somewhere in my attic, I have a bread rat, still glazed, from Hamburg.
A what?
No, from Hamlin, I mean.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, Hamlin, pie.
Exactly.
But bread, made out of bread.
Made out of bread, and it was glazed, and it still exists.
Oh, right.
And it's got a nice little pointed nose and whiskers like that. That's just one of the things that he brought me back.
So, I'm surprised he didn't tell you he worked for Universal Exports. Isn't that what James Bond and all that? That's the cover, isn't it?
But if you want the secret of what got me into news, it was definitely the fact that Dad used to have this ritual. Every Saturday night, he would polish the family's shoes, so ready for school. And it was a kind of, mad thing that he did. And he would have radio newsreel on while he was doing it. And I've got this vision of Dad polishing away on the things while all this news was coming in my ear on radio newsreel. And we also used to get the Times and the Mail every day at home, and I just became very interested in news.
What age did you start reading them and absorbing the news and maybe discussing it with your dad?
Well, I mean, I remember vividly the invasion of Hungary in 1956. Yes, and I would have been, well, I'm only 39. Let's get that straight. But
so you're an embryo.
I was in my pre-existence before I was 39. At that stage, I would have been 9 or coming up for 9, that sort of time.
But it's interesting because I a few years later, I mean, we've got these kind of parallels a decade apart. We'll get onto that in a moment. But I had similar experiences in the 60s with stories like the 6-Day War,
and
Vietnam, and all that. Yes, and the Prague Spring, and all those 68 revolts. It's amazing what it does to a child.
Well, I can remember my parents at one stage discussing on whether or not they were going to have some children, refugees from Hungary, to come over and live with us. And I was really alarmed by the sight of this, because I thought, we're having hungry children and they'll eat all my food. That's my generous
That's why in all the scripts I always wondered why you were spelling it wrong. Anyway. So, I mean, what then led you to follow? Did you have the ambition to become involved in this world that you were just absorbing, or did you park it and it kind of came upon you in adult life?
I've always been incredibly interested in news and current affairs and in people, and finding out about people and what makes them tick and things like that. That's a terrible cliche to say, but anyway, I've said it. You can edit it, people. Anyway, so I've always been very interested in news. And when I was at Sussex University, where I know you
there
came
we go.
along.
There's the parallels. Go on. What happened at Sussex?
Well, I edited a page in what was then called the Wine Press, which was the university newspaper, and wrote for it and things like that. And then immediately after leaving university, I went into journalism.
What was the Wine Press? What was your column about then? I wonder if you've got any still. What did you write about?
I wrote I don't know, about things that interested me, like, what clothes were on sale at the Bieber shop. Do you know Bieber had an outpost in Brighton?
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah.
I used to go there.
It was a bit like the Body Shop started up there, didn't it, as well? They were kind of that era, or was that in the 70s?
I don't know.
Yeah, the Body Shop was, again, the 10 years later. I remember the initial branch there. But, I mean, wasn't it a hotbed of, ferment? I mentioned those student years, particularly 1968 Vietnam.
Yes.
Weren't you always occupying buildings and annoying all the administration?
We were either sitting in or walking out. It was one of the two, just depending on the mood and what the weather was like. But there was a famous incident, as you probably, I'm sure, remember, about red paint. Does that ring any bells?
Well, elucidate.
Well, we were having a big symposium about the Vietnam War, and I think the American ambassador in London was going to come down and take part in this forum. Anyway, at some stage on the walk between the car park and the hall where it was all going to take place, somebody, I know who it was, but I will never say who.
Okay, it's not somebody sitting in this room.
No, no, because you were only about 2 at the time.
Well, I didn't mean me. So.
Oh, I see. Okay, no, not her either. Through red paint. It was a gesture at him, and it actually
as a gesture.
It missed him and hit his press attaché. But anyway, that was the end of that, and it was a big scandal, and everything happened after that. And years later, Asa Briggs, who was Vice Chancellor of Sussex University at that time, we became very friendly in his much later years and used to see a lot of him. And one evening I was with him, and he was telling me this story about how on the evening after this terrible sort of thing had happened with the ambassador, he was at home, sinking back in his chair with a nice large glass of scotch. The phone went. Picked it up. Is that Mr. Briggs? Yes, it's the U.S. Ambassador's office here. I'll just put... I'm so sorry, Mr. Ambassador. I couldn't be more sorry. I'm so regret. Don't worry about a thing, Asa. It wasn't me. It was just the press attaché, and the suit's gone to the cleaners. Don't worry about a thing. I had a ball. I really enjoyed myself, etc., etc. Put the phone down again. Another sip of whiskey. Phone goes again. Picks it up. Is that Mr. Briggs? Yes. This is the headmistress of Rodine here. One of your staff has run off with my head girl. What are you going to do about it?
Yes, it shows
that kind of summed up
calibration of reactions. Did you do any studying while you were there then?
Yeah.
What was it?
Yeah, it was English, in the School of English and American Studies.
So you did read a book or two and do a bit of academic writing?
Yeah, eventually, after the first year.
And did you go straight from university into your first job? Wasn't it print, magazines?
Yes, yeah. My first job was with Homes and Gardens magazine, darling.
Fantastic.
The editor was called Psyche Pirrie.
What a name.
And she presided behind a huge sort of walnut desk with a large silver bowl full of roses on one side. So that was what it was like in those days. Anyway, I was with IPC for a year. Then I got a job down in Brighton editing a newspaper for a company called ITT Creed. And ITT became quite famous, and I can't remember why. I think slightly infamous, but don't ask me why.
Okay.
But they made teleprinters. And I edited this newspaper. I blagged my way in by saying I knew how to, yes, I'm very good at photography. Yes, I can cast off copy. Yes, I can do this, that, and the other. Couldn't do any of it. Had to go and say to my boss, Ian, you know that thing, do you think you could just show me? I had to do it all. Write the whole darn thing and go to the factory in Brighton.
Showing journalistic aptitude,
and
getting in the door.
Down in Treforest in South Wales and then up to North London and everything, and produce this thing once a month. Anyway, on the strength of that, I applied to the BBC for its journalist training scheme and was accepted. But for domestic reasons, didn't take it up, went to live in France for a year, came back, but before I went, I did a month working in the radio newsroom writing scripts. Uh-huh. And on the strength of that, they said, come back and we'll take you on. So
it was radio. You were a trainee then, were you? Or did they just take you straight on? So you skipped the training scheme. And what did you experience there? Anything and everything that came your way, I guess.
Incredible. I mean, it was a wonderful environment. It was so completely different from what it is now. It was noisy. Sounds of telex machines everywhere and typists typing away like that and everyone bellowing across the room at each other. Whereas now, if you and I were sitting in the newsroom now and I wanted to say, do you fancy coming for a coffee? It'd be, it would be completely silent. Very male, very male.
And smoky, I'm guessing, as well,
very
perhaps.
Smoky, very male, very noisy.
And clickety-clackety.
Yeah.
Well, any big stories from then that you remember? So we're talking about, the 70s?
I'm talking about, I joined in 73, and then I became, obviously, Northern Ireland.
Yeah, constant,
I mean, you're asking me now.
No. I just wondered if, there was anything that made you stick out for the people you were working for and realise what a talent that they were lucky enough to have on their hands.
Me? No, God. You were given a pencil and a pad of lined paper, and if you were very lucky, you were given the Anne Finley, more or less the Anne Finley, or I think it was called the Foreign Roundup, where you wrote one sentence about something that had been happening abroad, and you'd write it down. And then you'd present it to the editor of the day, and he'd say, "Thank you very much." And then you'd see him sitting there, scratching it all out and rewriting it, handing it to the typist. So you work your way up very, very, very slowly.
Glacial. So you worked your way. You did work your way up. Yeah. How did you get into television then? And you were quite quickly industrial correspondent, was it, during some really tough years?
You say quick, actually. I was joined in 73.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, joined in 73. In 1979, I became full-time a reporter for BBC Radio News, and I was the only female reporter for BBC Radio. There was Kate Adie in telly and me in radio.
That was it.
And that was it. And, covered
the rise of Margaret
of
Thatcher, of course, then.
Well, yes, exactly, because while I was still doing that, it was 1979, wasn't it?
Yeah, when she was elected first time, yeah.
Yeah. So in 1979, Callaghan lost the vote of confidence, but he didn't go to the palace until the Monday of the following week to actually hand in his resignation. So there was this magical 3 days or 2 days over a weekend where the normal coverage that you had for elections, where they'd appoint the most senior reporter they could find to follow that her around. A dog's body like me was sent, first of all, to go down to Chelsea, where she'd let it be known that she was going to go shopping. So the entire world's press was gathered outside this small house in Chelsea, and cameramen and everything like that, and me with my ewer, my heavy ewer and my microphone. And the door eventually came out, and out she bustled, and she walked slightly like Mother Goose.
That's good, even in a chair, yeah.
Yes, and she bustled her way down to the butcher's that was just down the road, and we all swarmed in, so the butcher's shop was absolutely piled high with cameramen all trying to jump on top of each other, and Mrs. Thatcher saying, no, I'll go, I'll come and talk to you later. So all of them went out, but I stayed behind because I didn't have a camera and I was sort of more unobtrusive. And I saw what and so they were all outside the window with their cameras in like this. And she went over to the window, and there were these rows of New Zealand shoulders of lamb on hooks sort of hanging down. And she just parted them like that and looked out. And that was the cover of Private Eye the following week.
Listen, if you ever give up on the broadcasting, I think if there's still a demand for them, Margaret Thatcher impersonator. You've got the walk, you've got the voice.
Well, and the other thing I will say about her, because leaving politics completely on one side, she was incredibly impressive, and I could really understand, actually, because I followed her around. I was up in Finchley with her when she was going around talking to people in the streets and stuff like that. And then in later years, I was always trying to doorstep, ask her questions when she was on the hoof. I never did a sit-down thing with her.
Were you there in Downing Street for the victory when the general election happens? And
I absolutely was.
What happened then?
Well, that was quite a moment, because Callaghan left, and very dignified. I think he was probably relieved. And then there was this sort of moment of excitement as we were all waiting for Margaret Thatcher to appear. And in those days, Downing Street wasn't shut off.
Gates,
you could just sort of come up, and it was filling up with all the supporters, Maggie, 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 Maggie. And we were as close to the front door as I am to the end of this desk, okay? And there was John Snow, there was me, there was John Sargent, and then there was Michael Cole. Do you remember Michael Cole?
Legends all, yeah.
Exactly. Well, Michael Cole had been following her around during the election, and during the election, she used to be quite sort of flirtatious, or sort of relaxed, shall we say, at the end of every evening, and would take off her shoes.
John Sargent, who's been on, he was saying that.
Curled up her feet under, and had a little scotch, etc. Anyway, so suddenly this jaguar appeared and came snaking up the road towards us and stopped in front of us, and she got out, and everyone was going bonkers down that end of the thing, and she looked across, and she caught Michael Cole's eye, and she'd been with him. She said, "I'll be with you in a moment, Michael," like that. And then she went back down the end of the street and did all the business and was shaking hands. And then she came up to us. She always carried a handbag.
Yeah.
So she opened her handbag and fished out this piece of paper. And I was expecting some sort of flog 'em and whip 'em manifesto or something. And much to our amazement, she read out the prayer of St. Francis.
Yes, that's right, yeah.
Where there is this, let there be that. And where is something else, let it be the other. And so on. And we were all kind of, we can't believe this is happening. Anyway, then having done that, she put it back in her bag and gave another wave, stood on the doorstep where Dennis was standing behind her with that sort of...
I need a drink.
I need a drink, and I mustn't say anything. Yeah, look at his face.
You became industrial correspondent.
Yes.
I mean, and what an absolute turmoil. You mentioned Margaret Thatcher, and talk about governments with no agendas now, it seems. Well, there was an agenda, and it was take those unions 100%. on and crack them.
There was me, and there was a guy called Nick Jones, and he was... senior to me, and he sort of took care of the sort of big boys. I was, I did the health workers and people like that, and of course the miners' strike did then start erupting, but I went on maternity leave at that point. But one of the reasons why I was quite committed to applying for it was that when I had been working down in Brighton, I'd been working in a factory context, and so again entirely used to being surrounded by blokes and dealing with unions and stuff like that. So I felt quite at home with it in a way. It didn't faze me.
It should be emphasised though how as a woman, just how alone you really were in terms of colleagues.
Yeah. I was the only woman on the industrial hack beat. And I had a wonderful...
Did you find you were treated differently? Did it bother you?
No, not really.
Like the Julia now. You just got on with it.
Yeah. And actually, I had one wonderful memory, which was that the miners were holding Joe Gormley, who was, remember, head of the
Before
miners'
Arthur
union.
Scargill.
Yes, exactly that. It was going to be his last ever union conference. And so he was allowed to choose where he'd like to go. And rather surprisingly, he decided not to choose rainy Bournemouth, but he chose to go to Jersey instead, which was gorgeously... It's the only time I've ever been to Jersey. Anyway, so we were all staying in this wonderful hotel with all the miners' delegates and everything. And in the morning, they get through their business double quick, so that by the afternoon, we were all down by the pool.
I mean, you really earned your journalistic chops. And in terms of perception of all of us who became newsreaders, there was and still is a perception you read other people's words out loud, and in particular for women who do it. You're just there as, particularly as we get on to the later years, you're there as a foil to the grizzled old male you're sitting beside. But you did the hard yards.
Yes, I mean, I got into it entirely by accident. I wasn't intending to go into television.
So how did it happen? You were asked by the bosses?
No, well, actually not. By my first screen husband, as it turned out. I was at home on maternity leave and beginning to think, oh, God, I've got to go back and start following the miners around. And I was so in love with my son, I didn't want to do that at all. I wanted to, in fact, I was really thinking, do I actually want to go back to work?
And I guess, in terms of work environment, a less enlightened view about young mothers in those days.
Well, I don't know about that so much, but it was just how I felt about, having to go back to a job where I could be sent all over the place. And then I got a phone call from John Humphreys.
Wow.
Saying, who I'd met, we must have met on the sort of news reporting beat or something. And he said they're looking for somebody to take over from Sue Lawley, because she's going to be launching the 6 o'clock news, which was the new one with Nick Witchell. And they're looking for somebody to take over, and I've suggested, would you be interested? So I thought this is a joke, so I turned up, looking very much like a woman who's just had a baby and was probably baby sick on one shoulder, kind of thing. And did my, whatever they asked me to do, read a bit of stuff.
You had a screen test and all that, kind of auto cue breaking down and how'd you cope with it and all that kind of thing.
Any of that, I don't remember, but I just remember that they asked me to do it, and it was a wonderful gig because you did 3 days. John and I weren't together. We were boxing and coxing at that point.
Was it single presenter, 9 o'clock news, right?
Yeah. And then after a year, we were put together, and John and I did it together for a year, like sort of husband and wife. So he was not strictly speaking my screen husband at that point, but he became my screen husband when we were put on screen.
I'm keeping
together.
notes here. So John Humphreys, number one. What I want to start with.
I think about 25.
But he didn't like it. I mean, he always said about those years that he didn't really enjoy it. I mean, he was one, from the journalistic side, felt he was a bit of a gob on a stick, and it wasn't really that hard. I
completely understand why he felt that, and I think that when he went to the Today programme, he was back in his true métier, that was what he really wanted to do, and he was extremely good at it. And of course, he'd been a wonderful correspondent in Washington and in South Africa.
And earlier than that, I always remember, he's reporting from Aberfan in the 60s and many others. Big stories while you were there. So what's occurring then? I suppose we get to 1989 and there's the fall of the Berlin Wall.
Yes, well, by that stage I was at ITN. I went over to ITN in 87.
Right.
And yes, very much so. I mean, there are 2 stories. If you were to ask me...
I'm asking you now.
Okay. If you were to ask me, of all the stories that I've actually been live on air and while they've been happening, that I now look back on and think, actually, those were pretty seismic events in that they've had consequences that we are still living with today. One of them was the fall of the Berlin Wall. And I was doing News at 10 with Alistair Burnett, and we knew things were boiling up, but while we were on the air, that famous piece of masonry came tipping forward, and there were all these faces
the other side,
looking, and it was just the most incredible moment. So they decided that we should go what they call open-ended, which means, the programme does not come off the air at the end. You just carry on until they feel that they've done enough. And Alistair, who was brilliant and a wonderful person to present with, was quite partial to a little nip of, something.
For medicinal purposes, of course.
For medicinal purposes only, exactly like that. And, at the end of, he was expecting, by 10:30, by 31 minutes past, he'd be back up there and having a little nip. Anyway, that wasn't going to happen. So the floor manager, who's called Pat, and knew Alistair really well, a woman called Pat, recognised, the drama that might be about to ensue. So she rushed out of the studio and came back with a large bottle of scotch and a glass and kind of limbo danced under the cameras and came to the table between us on her hands and knees and filled up a glass like that and then went off like that. And while I was on the screen, while somebody was reporting, Alistair kind of...
kept going.
And then we were back on track.
It's kind of reverse engineering, because a lot of people said give him some black coffee and some water and get him going, but he just needed more.
Exactly. To just cheer himself up.
Yeah, I'm sure it was a fine malt as well.
Anyway, so that was one of the stories, which I think we can all agree we're still living with the consequences today, going on, going on.
And earlier than that, weren't you, didn't you come across, which they kind of fit together, which led to the fall of the Berlin Wall. Earlier than that, weren't you kind of witness to bits and pieces of glasnost, perestroika, the kind of rapprochement between the United States 100%. And the USSR?
Yeah, because again, while I was at ITN, Gorbachev went over to America to do a summit with Reagan. And this was a big story, but that because obviously Gorbachev was representing the new way of the Soviet Union approaching the West and having it, being perestroika and all that. And two things happened while I was over. So I was presenting the lunchtime news from there, which meant getting up at 4 a.m, because obviously they're 5 hours behind. And I also thought I might just be pregnant because I was feeling sick as a cat every morning anyway when we got up, but nonetheless. So Gorbachev came and he caused this incredible stir because his motorcade, he stopped it and he got out and he started to shake hands with the people on the pavement. And this was completely unheard of. And you just can't imagine any of his predecessors doing anything like that.
Well, the great Satan to the United States, and there he is glad-handing down the streets of Washington, D.C.
Being utterly charming. Anyway, the day before the summit was due to take place, I was working in the building that ITN was occupying, and I went down to go home back to the hotel. And there, standing on the pavement, was a man I immediately recognised as a chap called Gennady Gerasimov, who was his rather sort of unlikely looking. He looked almost like a sort of conductor or an artist or something, who was Gorbachev's spokesman. He was standing on the pavement, looking a bit sort of ahead, So I went up to him and I said, "Hello, you. Hi, I know who you are, and I'm here covering the thing. Are you lost? Or, is there something?" And he said, "I'm actually looking for a barber, so I must get a haircut before tomorrow." And I realised and remembered that there was a hairdresser's in the basement of the building that ITN was broadcasting from. So I said, "I actually think I know one. Come with me." So I walked him down to the bottom of the stairs, and there was this sort of brightly lit salon. I think it was probably full of women. I don't remember. But anyway, I left him there. And much to my enjoyment, the next day I saw this extremely well-groomed, tidy-looking Gerasimov doing his number.
He was in a much better mood. So there you are, Julia Somerville, your part in, as I say, the treaties that were then signed between the United States and the then USSR. Tell me about 1987, because that was really important when I remember I just started out in television, and it was all over the papers. Julia Somerville is leaving. The face of the 9 o'clock news, mighty engine, is leaving the BBC and going to ITN.
Yes,
what was the decision behind that? Why did you go?
I went.
And why did they want you?
Well, exactly. You'll have to ask them.
Okay, I'll ask them that.
I think the reason I went was that I thought that the format of the lunchtime news involved interviewing and things like that, which I really wanted to do, because the problem with the way things were at the BBC for newscasters was you were completely rigid. You just had to do the news. That was it. There were no other programmes that they got you involved with or anything like that. And I thought, at ITN there'd be a bit more variety. And I also felt, to be honest with you, it would fit more easily with having kids and all that.
But there was the old kind of almost showbiz poaching going on there, wasn't there? Didn't the BBC take someone from ITN and they thought, right, we'll retaliate.
I'll tell you what happened. Peter Sissons.
That's it.
No. Martin Lewis, sorry.
Oh, yes.
Martin Lewis went from ITN and I went to BBC.
Right.
And one of the papers headlined this as the tit-for-tat exchange.
The end of the Alistair Burnett, you've mentioned Alistair, his era, he dominated News at 10 from its foundation right up to the early 90s. He left News at 10 in 1991, and I think left ITN as well. Trevor McDonald was promoted, and they went, this was seismic at the time, single anchor.
Yes.
It was just going to be Trevor, not the double heading that people had remembered before. But you moved to News at 10 and I think did the bits that Trevor didn't do, and had your own segment within the new look News at 10.
Well, that was because I'd had a brain tumour and had an operation, and I'd been out of, I hadn't been working for, I don't know, whatever it was, 3 or 4 months or something like that. Anyway, came back with a newly shaved head and was offered this segment that I did, and I can't remember what it was called. But
Focus on Britain. I remember it. Yeah.
Oh, well, you've got a better memory than me. Thank you.
You had to stand up. It was revolutionary. You were standing up in front of a big screen and doing a story of, interest, national interest, rather than importance.
Well, if you say so. If you find it interesting, I'm really glad, because I don't remember anything about it, really.
I was a toady then. I was trying to get on.
And so you did.
But Trevor was wonderful to work with, wasn't he? Trevor's been in, and I mean, it must have just been wonderful, being a colleague.
And actually, I have to say a small word about Sandy Gall, because Sandy Gall was the other stalwart of News at 10 alongside Alistair Burnett. And he was incredibly dapper. Do you remember? He used to wear these wonderful ties and a matching kerchief, always the thing. And the weird thing was that very often, more often than not, I would find that I had chosen a jacket in the same colour as his tie and kerchief to wear. Wasn't that weird?
Well, I don't know. Yeah, it's kind of...
This may seem trivial to you, but believe
it matters to the audience. So how many screen husbands do I have to add? How many do I have to add here? Because you've got all these News at 10 co-presenters. So I've got Sandy, Alistair.
Look, and you've left out...
Trevor.
Yeah, but you haven't dealt with all the people at the BBC, like Andrew Harvey. Philip Hayton... anyway, I've tried.
Right, okay,
I think there's about 25.
Right, so I was going to say we're going to get into the dozens here. So maybe I won't write them all down. Well, I became one of them. Was lucky enough to become one of them quite early on. They paired you and I up on the lunchtime news, which, as you say, was a huge amount of fun to do because it was kind of earlier in the day. Yeah. They didn't throw a huge amount of production resources at it, and the stories were ill-formed, and there was a lot of chatting to do and interviewing to do because they again hadn't filmed many reports like they did then have for News at 10 later on in the evening. I think that was around about 1994 or something like that. Anyway, we don't need the dates to be precise. All you've got to say, Julie, is what fun that was.
Yeah. What fun that was, Dan.
Thank you very much indeed. Right, let's move on.
No, take two. Oh, what fun that was. That was such fun.
You're the one I want to forget. There were a lot of big stories around then. I remember, when poor John Smith, leader of the Labour Party, who was clearly going to be the next Prime Minister, the next Labour Prime Minister, passed away. And this Wunderkind, Tony Blair, came into power. And that story broke on us that John Smith had passed. And I remember being on air with you and just, it's those breaking stories when the juices flow and you don't realise at the time that they are seismic. The world will never be the same again.
Yeah, I suppose you could say that about the Labour. Anyway, what I do remember vividly was the night of the general election when all the results were starting to come in. I had been told I got to go and cover the story from the Liberal Democrats' headquarters. Mm-hmm. And then I was suddenly told, no, actually, you're going to go and be with Labour because this, what was his name?
Yeah.
Began with D.
That's
some Irish. Darrell. Dermot.
Yeah, that's right. Familiar,
this guy, Monaghan. That's right. Dermot Monaghan, the cheeky little monkey, was going to be covering the Labour Party thing. And but because your wife had a baby.
How damn inconvenient.
I mean, that's a hell of an excuse. But anyway, it worked.
And the little so-and-so wouldn't emerge. I remember being on the phone because obviously, it was, the dogs in the street knew that Labour was going to win and win big.
With him. I said, don't emerge until I've covered this story.
She's 28 now. Can you believe it? Yeah, there you are, Molly. I just remember that because I was in the hospital on a clunky mobile phone then watching on one of these TVs that, you held and kind of got a signal with an aerial while my poor wife is, lying on the bed and I'm calling the boss going, no, I'll be fine. Come on. Yeah, I'll be fine. But then look, credit to me. I took the decision. I've got to be here for the birth.
Yes.
My wife said, go. It's going to be a big. I said, no. I really want to stay, and did. And
I rang Molly on a special hotline I've got for reaching babies.
Stay in. Don't come out yet. I remember. Yes, she was born more or less as the first result, which was then and probably still is. Sunderland South came. It was big, massive win for Labour, and we knew which way that night was going. Huge. This was things are only going to get better. Yes. What a party! I watched on my little screen.
I was in the festival hall, and it was absolutely mad. There were banging beats going on. There was a huge screen with all the results coming in, and everyone was drinking and dancing and hugging and kissing each other. And then, that thing about, were you there when Michael Portillo lost his seat? Yes, I was, and I can remember. I'm sorry, Michael. But
he's not sorry now.
No, he's doing all right, actually.
With his railway timetable.
There was this huge cheer and everyone was absolutely thrilled. And the atmosphere was really bubbling and it was like being at the best disco in the world. Then all of a sudden there was this slight chill, I don't know, just kind of feeling that, oh my goodness, somebody's coming in. And in came Peter Mandelson with a sort of phalanx of young men, sort of cool-looking, slightly forbidding young men accompanying him. So obviously I had to go and interview him, which I did, and, that was all absolutely fine. But there was something about him, and, everyone kind of partied like that. It was a bit like, the Red Sea. And
This is so much fun chatting. Because those years, the other thing is you were a real mentor to me in terms of your experience and just who you were. I couldn't believe it was my first big job to actually be presenting with, Julia Somerville, all your experience, your expertise, your presenting, is actually quite hard to get right. Your naturalness, your ability to ad lib, all that, And we did. The other big story that occurs to me was mentioning Peter Mandelson. His first resignation of the three he's now had was from the Lunchtime News when he had that mortgage arrangement on a flat that he probably on his MP salary couldn't afford, and he'd had a loan from another richer MP, and he hadn't actually declared it, and we got him to kind of admit that or half admit it, and he was gone after the lowly ITN Lunchtime News.
He is still alive, that.
Yeah. But it's all a matter of fact.
Okay, all right. Okay.
It's out there.
Actually, I've got a really funny story. So that's almost my last encounter with Peter Mandelson was in 1997 in the festival hall. Roll forward to about August last year. I'm heaving my suitcase onto the train to go up to Salford to record Rip Off Britain. And I'm aware that, it's a big bulky thing and I'm heaving it up, and there's somebody behind me, and I sort of thought, I'd better let them get past first. So when I got in, I said, do. It was Peter Mandelson. He was travelling up also to Manchester, and so he got into the compartment and sat down at a space just inside, and mine was a little bit further up, and I thought, I can't possibly let this moment go because, Labour having just won the election and everything it was really like fate bringing us together. So I got up and walked down his end because the loos were also down there. Anyway, he was absolutely fast asleep. He was like this. So I can't wake him up like this. So I waited until the announcement had been made, more or less, that we were at whichever the
hovering over.
Yeah, well, we were about to get off. So I thought, I've got to do this. So I went up and we had a very nice chat about how things were and how he was feeling about things and how he thought it would go, etc. But it was quite weird, wasn't it? That those should be those two moments when I actually encountered him.
But you and I were, just during those 90s years, you and I were colleagues, obviously, on the lunchtime-news. And before this becomes too much, I'm just going to get this out of the way, too much like the Julia and Dermot Obsessed show. But you and I were rivals as well, because ITV, when it canned World in Action, it's kind of big rival, and as I always thought, better than Panorama. It stopped doing that and decided to do two current affairs shows, which flip-flopped over the year. I did one called The Big Story, which quite often wasn't very big. But you did one called 3D.
I did, yeah, that's right. I think that was...
Not much sticks in the memory then of that.
No, I do remember, because I had to go to Leeds to record it.
Yorkshire TV.
Yeah. But I was literally topping and tailing. There was nothing of me in it. I hadn't done any of the reporting or anything like that. Yeah, I do remember that. But I also remember launching the ITN news channel. Do you remember?
Right, yes.
That was 1989.
That was...
No, 1999.
That was ITN breaking into rolling news, 24-hour channels, which seemed revolutionary at the time. And Sky News had been running for about 10 years by then. But you were one of the launch anchors, weren't you?
I was the launch, and I was really angry because there was a fantastic party going on down in the atrium.
I went to it.
Champagne was flowing, and I wasn't there.
Yeah, they wouldn't have me. But that's hard yards, having spent 16 years at Sky News. It's very different from the rolling autocue half an hour at most on air, and then, off you go home and not too much to think about. Yes. When you're just holding the court for hour after hour. But again, I remember, water off a duck's back to you.
I remember, I think it must have been when I was on the news channel that I would arrive, and having tried very hard to get my son out of bed to go to school, that thing where you rip the things off and you say, come on, it's time to go. Yeah, and yeah, mum. And then, he hasn't. And I used to get the producer sometimes to ring my number and tell, see if he was awake. And one time when I was droning away about, the latest trade figures or something, I could hear this man saying, "Hello, Joe, this is ITN here. Your mother says get up."
That's the way to do it. Second only to getting the PM to
trying to combine the role of mother with
Sure, he didn't bother with it. Anyway, no, I should say, so then you left ITN, you did the news channel for a while.
I'll tell you what I also did. Before I left ITN, I did I'd do the lunchtime news. Then I'd scamper down to the basement where LBC had taken up residence, because at that stage...
Back to radio.
Yes, they'd been taken over, I think, by...
Right.
TV. Anyway, they were part of the family, if you like. And I had a 2-hour programme that I did in the afternoon from 2 till 4, 5 days a week. And it was one of those things where it was totally under-resourced. It was just me and a producer. And it was tailored really to my interests. So there was stuff about what was going on in the world of the arts in London and current affairs and books and things like that. So it was that type of a show. And there was just this poor producer who had to sort of get it all together. And I remember going down on a certain date, of which you will know when I tell you what it was, 9/11.
Blimey.
And at about, so I was on the air from 2 to 4, about 1:45 we got this news, this flash, that a plane had gone into one of the Twin Towers. And I think at that stage we all thought some light aircraft
That's right.
grazed it. And then there are reports of a number of casualties. That's all it said. So we thought, God, we must try and do something. So by 2:00, I was in the studio. There were no lines whatsoever to New York. Everything was down.
Lines of information, it should have said, coming on the
couldn't
news
get hold of anybody. No,
nobody, or even from there.
Because I think the Americans had totally cut it all off. And I had a monitor in there, and I could see this extraordinary, tall building that I'd been in. I'd been up to the top and had a cocktail up there and all that. And I could see this sort of disgusting, black, seeping, oily stripe across it, and you could see people at the window. I like that. And then they managed to get a woman who worked for a Washington-based radio station up, and so I was just chatting to her. And as we were chatting, I saw this other plane come in from the left, and it because the towers were behind each other, it just sort of disappeared. And then this enormous orange thing like a parachute, sort of silk taffeta parachutes thing came out. And I said, have you just seen what I've seen? And she said, yes. Anyway, 2 hours later, I came out and the towers were down.
Yeah.
And the moment where the towers came down, I'm sure you remember it. I mean, it wasn't a heroic kind of... It was a collapse. It was a surrender. I mean, the imagery of that day, as far as America's concerned, we're still living with the consequences.
Talk about the world never being the same again. Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I think you would relate to this, that when you've got a job to do, you're working on two levels, because somebody's telling you in your ear that they've managed to get this person up, or you've got to break for the news, or there's stuff going on, and then there's this. And the other thing is, in radio, you've got to talk. If you're in television and you're watching horror,
silence works, because you just pause and look at it.
And there will probably be words running along the bottom. Yeah. In radio, it was the worst couple of hours I've ever had in my life. And I had kind of almost like delayed shock afterwards because of because if you remember, the camera took you closer in than you could possibly have got were you just standing on the pavement looking up. And you could see actual people,
tumbling out,
throwing
jumping
themselves out.
It was that sheer sense of disbelief, wasn't it, that this is happening? It was.
I think especially, America thinking of itself as, ruling the world, basically,
and impregnable.
By that stage. Exactly. A sort of large island. Yes, I mean, God, they could never have known, those people when who did it, exactly how potent that imagery would be, because, as I say, it was surrender. That's what it was. They literally went down, collapsed to their knees.
But it's the interesting part from your point of view is obviously being witness to that and trying to interpret it as much as you could. But how you do that for the audience, what you tell them, what you glean, what you can confirm and what you can't confirm. It all seems. Seems to be changing now, that anyone can, go and speculate and make things up.
Well, speculation
on social media, but you don't do that, do you?
Yeah, well, I think
go with
also,
what you've got.
Had I been working for ITN as opposed to IRN at that point, all the resources of all the correspondents and people with experience of foreign affairs and blah, blah, blah would have all been available to come in and sort of talk about possible issues, of course, because there had been a background. There'd been another attempted bombing of the basement area of
a few years earlier.
Yeah, exactly. So there was a history, and then there were things that had happened to Americans abroad, in the Middle East and so on. But none of that was available, and also it seems almost indecent to sit there and sort of almost gossip, speculate. So you couldn't do that. And there wasn't anyone to do it. Well, they got a guy in eventually who'd been an IRN person in Washington, but that was it.
The other huge story you and I covered together was, of course, the death of Diana, Princess of Wales. The fact it actually happened in a kind of more or less pre-internet age, and nobody really knew about it. It was Saturday night, Sunday morning, and the way that message disseminated. And then, of course, those extraordinary days, very different from 9/11, but similar in the sense you felt the world, the tectonic plates was somehow shifting, how unpopular the senior members of the royal family were, the extraordinary outpouring of grief for Diana, the flowers, the keening, the wailing, the weeping. And that day of the funeral, I remember, because it was going to be difficult to get in and out, you and I were both covering it for ITN, and they put us in a hotel which was walkable then to our broadcast positions. And it always stuck in my mind, just walking through, I think it was St. James's Park, and the thousands of people who'd slept out overnight. And that sticks in my mind more than, being front and centre watching the cortege and all that.
Well, yes, I mean, my position was, my broadcasting position was up on that. They'd got a sort of a dais arrangement directly looking at the entrance to Westminster Abbey. So, of course, we saw the cortege arriving, and the very heartbreaking sight of those boys. But, and, Harry, so small, head down like that. And I mean,
and Ramrod Strait, Prince Philip there, the military guy, the naval guy marching.
Apparently he said to the boys, look, I'm going to do it. So can you, if I do it, will you do it? And they said, this is what was evidently said. And, I think we all know what they were there to make sure that the crowd behaved themselves, which they did.
Extraordinary times. You leave ITN, and then I know you love art. Art, architecture, and you ended up becoming.
I chaired the advisory committee on the government art collection.
What have they got? Yeah. They must have millions of pounds worth.
They've got a lot.
We don't get to see much of it.
Well, you've got if you live in Downing Street, you'll see quite a lot.
I know. Come on.
And if you live in Embassies, you'll see quite a lot.
The Nation owns it. Come on, let's have a look at it.
I know. And actually, to be fair,
what did the advisory committee? What did you decide?
Well, we had
where to display it.
Where to display it, and particularly what to buy. And our budget, was minuscule compared to what to try and buy a piece of contemporary art by a famous contemporary artist. Impossible. So it had to be done through sort of goodwill or ingratiating, I suppose, all the people wanted to be displayed in certain places. Actually, it was quite funny because I went to Downing Street as part of with the chairman of the committee and a couple of other people, because we were going to have a rehang at Downing Street. So this was it the first time it wasn't the first time I'd been in there. But anyway, went in there and suddenly a door burst open and out came Gordon Brown with his sort of phalanx of people, and they were bustling off to a meeting. And that was quite.
He wasn't cross, was he? Because apparently he was a bit,
I couldn't know. There was no sign of him being cross, but he was very much Gordon Brown. And then the other weird thing was, out popped John. What was the name of the DG who took over?
John Burt.
John Burt.
He was there. Oh, right. He was there.
He was
having a consultation.
I don't know. Yes, but nothing to do with the BBC, because I don't think at that stage he was.
Okay.
Anyway, I don't know. He became something else afterwards. Anyway, that was quite strange.
Tell me what they've got. I asked you that. I mean, I have this kind of vision of it being like the end scene of Raiders of the Lost Ark, where the first one where they hide the Ark in this warehouse and it pans out and you can't see the sides. It's just fast and fast and fast. I kind of imagine it being like that. They've got Tintorettos and Caravaggios and Constables and whatever. Have you seen stuff that the rest of us don't see?
Well, I have in a way, because they have a storage place as well. And
they do have one.
Yeah, and you can go along and pull out these. Quite often if you're deciding that you rather want that one to go to the embassy in Rome and bring back the one that's in Rome to put somewhere else, and they will draw out these long drawers, and there are all these paintings hanging.
But you got your OBE for that, I should have mentioned that. Oh, yeah, wasn't it for services to art?
I call it other buggers' efforts, actually.
Right, well, yeah. I wasn't going to say that, but...
Well, it's true. Honestly. I would never have accepted an honour for journalism because I don't believe in it. But, the committee, the person who ran the committee wanted to put me forward. It would have been churlish to say no, and it wasn't... It wasn't because of me. I thought it was much more an honour to do with them, and they were doing it. No, I
for the journalism.
Honestly, I really didn't.
Where's mine? It's not coming.
But it is what I said. Other buggers' efforts.
Yeah. Well,
okay.
You can say that, but
you couldn't possibly comment.
I fundamentally disagree in your case, in some other people's.
Yeah.
Rip off Britain.
Yes.
You've been on the. You mentioned that you've been at the BBC as long as you were anywhere else. It's long running, isn't it?
14 years with the BBC, 14 years with ITN, and now 15 years back with the BBC.
You were glad to go back, though, because I always remember you saying to me at ITN, I'm not sure I should have left the BBC. For all its foibles and frustrations, it's still, it's the BBC.
Well, there's that about it, and there's also the fact that very soon after I left, they started to give newscasters much more opportunity to do other things, to be involved with other programmes, do a bit of reporting and so on. And so obviously I missed out on that. But no, I was very pleased to go back. And at one stage, when it was Angela, Gloria and me, combined ages of the presenters well over 200 and climbing. and the gift that keeps on giving. And, that's not to be sneezed
Well, I must have
at.
you all in here, all legends, of course. In your
Well,
own...
Angela, of course, has gone dancing off.
Oh, my goodness me, yeah. And
brilliantly, it must be said.
Yeah, it's astonishing.
Did you see that?
On Strictly?
Yeah, the leg.
I know, I can't believe it.
Sometimes on Rip-Off, I used to jokingly say, look, if you don't come clean and start, talking turkey, we'll send Angela around and she can do the splits.
Do you fancy it? You sound a little bit jealous. Do you fancy Strictly yourself?
I'd love to learn to dance, but I would absolutely hate the press intrusion.
I mean, we should have talked about that because you did, I remember, you did face an awful lot of that. I don't want to, talk about specific events, but because of when you did it and obviously being female, and you were in the tabloid eye for a long, long time. Which
was bitterly ironic because I never appeared on television until I was 37 or 36. Okay. Anyway, and I'd just become a mother. So I didn't feel insecure about myself at all. And I was also absolutely determined to protect my privacy and the privacy of the family. And in fact, I've got a sort of mantra, which is privacy is like virginity. You can only lose it once. When it's gone, it's gone. Yeah. So you have to be incredibly careful not to give interviews about this, that, and the other, and certainly not to let them into your house, etc. So, and don't cooperate. Don't agree to be photographed wearing this, that, and the other. In order to promote yourself before you've even done the job, kind of thing. So I'd been assiduous about that. So when I was finally, arrested and taken to Charing Cross Police Station and all that stuff, and it came out in the papers, that was a little bit. Yeah. Actually, funnily enough, I can now claim, apart from being a judge, I've covered more or less every angle of the criminal procedure. I've been arrested. Okay. I've been a witness. I've been a member of the jury and the foreman of the jury.
Wow.
In that order.
So well qualified in a way to recognise the wrong uns when it comes to rip off Britain.
I don't know about that.
But I mean, do you feel, because it's a daytime show, a lot of people don't see these, but I think it plays a really important role. And it really is part of the BBC's remit. Here we are, actually, putting on a programme that makes a real difference to real people's lives and illustrates a wider whole.
Yeah. And in fact, just the piece of very good news fairly recently was the BBC was putting out, if you like, to tend or deciding what programmes that it should actually put out to be done by other people and what they were going to keep in-house. And praise be, they've kept Rip Off Britain in-house, which is a wonderful thing. We're really thrilled about that.
But also, isn't it great to have three female presenters, with a combined age of probably gone up a bit.
No, it's gone down. Well,
actually... Okay, I see it fluctuates in terms of who's doing it.
The cheeky minx, is like
lovely
20
Louise.
years younger than me.
Yeah.
A bit more.
Yeah.
God. How did that happen? Anyway.
Julia, we're out of time. We're going to share a car home, aren't we? We are. Yeah. It's time for us to flee. But, we've got lots more to talk about.
Yes.
This is a returning series. I think you know what one of those is.
I think this is the bon bouche before the real meal, which takes place probably in a bar somewhere.
I could see that facility with French that year living in France. That certainly stood you in good stead.
Marie.
Listen, Julia, thank you so much for letting us invade your privacy just a little bit and share some of those wonderful memories. Yeah, listen, if you ever want to put a mail on Rip Off Britain or anything else with Julia, I'm your man.
You certainly are. And he's honestly one of my favourite screen husbands. That's got to be said.
Julia, legend of news, thank you very, very much indeed.
Thank you much. May I call you darling?
Of course,
That's like being like Margaret Thatcher.
Darling.
I'll be with you in a moment, Dermot.